Now in our 26th year, more than a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition, number 1354, with a release and air date of Saturday, February 8, 2025. Please take the program to your air, following the cue tone.
On the air around the world on the amateur radio bands, streaming on audio platforms on the internet, and podcast since 1993. Serving the worldwide amateur radio community with weekly, amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. The worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1354 of This Week in Amateur Radio. We have late-breaking news as we come to air this week, as the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act is reintroduced in Congress. We will have full coverage. The Federal Communications Commission upholds its order against an amateur radio operator. Austria's historic Moosbrunn shortwave transmission site is taken down. SiriusXM's latest high-power satellite, SXM-9, is now operational. The magnetic North Pole has officially moved its position. The first Archipelago D expedition in 23 years has been given permission to activate by the Brazilian Navy. Slow-scan television from the first manned polar orbiting mission will be happening soon. The Australian Communications and Media Authority publishes its new licence fee charges for Australian amateurs. We will tell you how amateur radio is thriving at one senior living centre in the US. The Radio Society of Great Britain issues a new amateur radio syllabus and is looking for a new editor. We will have the current edition of the US Volunteer Monitoring Report. And we will have a quick look at 3 spy satellites launched in the 1970s. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will be here with advice on how to find your path in the amateur radio hobby. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us all aboard the Wayback Machine to the year 1919, when in late December, radio was blacked out again. But this time it was nature's doing, not a government edict. Hams discovered the shorter wavelengths were dead despite the fact that 600-meter signals were still pounding in. Amateurs were in the process of learning about solar cycles and atmospheric propagation in an episode simply called Freaks. We will stop by and visit with Bill Salyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on D expeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio in snowy Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And from sunny, beautiful Naugatuck, Connecticut, where the sun always shines, I'm Steve Sawyer, K1FRC.
Reporting from our news bureau just outside Music City, USA in Lebanon, Tennessee, taking a break from FT8, I'm Al Shephard, WK8W.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we're getting ready for a lot of snow, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in downtown Syracuse, New York, from the station of K2MST inside the Museum of Science and Technology, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where we're expecting 2 and maybe 3 major snowstorms to come rolling in later this week. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we've been promised another round of winter weather, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, looking for my snow shovel again.
United States Senators Roger Wicker of Mississippi and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, and Representatives August Pfluger of Texas and Joe Courtney, also of Connecticut, announced their joint reintroduction of legislation in the Senate and House to restore the right to amateur radio operators to install the antennas necessary to serve their communities. Homeowner association rules often prevent amateur radio operators from installing antennas at their homes, even though amateur radio has proven to be essential in emergencies and natural disasters, such as hurricanes, when other means of communication fail. Mississippians should have access to every possible means of warning for natural disasters, including amateur radio operators. In an emergency, those warnings can mean the difference between life and death, Senator Wicker said. The Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act would remove unnecessary roadblocks that could help keep communities safe during emergencies like tornadoes, hurricanes, and fires. When disaster strikes, amateur radio operations provide vital, often life-saving information, which shouldn't be hindered by prohibitive rules or confusing approval processes. The Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act eliminates obstacles for ham radio enthusiasts, allowing them to continue their communications and serve their communities in the face of emergencies, said Senator Blumenthal. Natural disasters and other emergency situations that hinder our regular lines of communication are unfortunately unavoidable, which is why we must bolster our emergency preparedness by removing the barriers amateur radio operators often run into when installing antennas. Amateur radio plays a vital role in public safety by delivering critical information to people at all times. My district is home to dozens of amateur radio operators ready to volunteer in the event of an emergency, and I am proud to lead this legislation, said Congressman August Pfluger. As we know from recent natural disasters, amateur radios in Connecticut can be a critical component of disaster response and emergency management. It is in our community's best interest that we give them the capabilities to operate at the highest level, and with the reintroduction of this bill, we have taken a strong step in that direction, said Congressman Courtney. The Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act of 2025, H.R. 1094 and S. 459, would require homeowner associations to accommodate the needs of FCC-licensed amateur radio operators by prohibiting the enforcement of private land use restrictions that ban, prevent, or require the approval of the installation or use of amateur radio station antennas. Homeowner associations have often prevented installation and use of such antennas through private land use restrictions. This has hindered voluntary training for emergency situations and blocked access to necessary communications when disaster strikes. Among other provisions, this legislation would prohibit homeowner association rules that would prevent or ban amateur radio antennas, specifically an approval process for installing amateur radio antennas, and provide a federal private right of action to amateur radio operators in disputed cases. On behalf of America's amateur radio licensees, Rick Roderick, the president of the American Radio Relay League, reconfirmed the ARRL's full support for the passage of the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act of 2025 and extended his thanks and appreciation to Senators Wicker and Blumenthal and Congressmen Pfluger and Courtney for their unflagging leadership in the bipartisan effort to support and protect the rights of all amateur radio operators. The full text of the House version can be found on the House website under Bill number H.R. 1094.
Coming up on our 26th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
In enforcement news, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission has upheld the record fine it proposed in 2022 for an Idaho-based amateur radio operator for intentionally interfering with radio communications during fire suppression efforts. In a forfeiture order released in early January, the commission affirmed its original civil penalty of $34,000 against Jason Frawley, a licensee of amateur radio station WA7 11 QC for willfully and repeatedly operating without authorization and interfering with the radio communications of the United States Forest Service back in 2021. Specifically, Frawley was found responsible for interfering with the radio communications of the U.S. Forest Service and the Idaho Department of Lands during efforts to direct fire suppression on a 1,000-acre wildfire on national forest lands. The FCC originally issued a notice of apparent liability for forfeiture back in June of 2022, proposing a fine of $34,000, the maximum allowable fine in such cases. Frawley responded to the NAL, acknowledging that he did transmit on government frequencies, but claimed that his good faith and non-malicious intent to help the emergency responders, along with a history of compliance with applicable regulations, should warrant a reduction in the proposed fine. In the end, the FCC denied Frawley's request for leniency, upholding its originally proposed fine.
The 320-ton rotating curtain antenna in Moosbrunn, Austria, was dismantled this week as part of the decommissioning of the historic shortwave radio site ORS, according to reporting from the Austrian newspaper Der Standard. A true monster of a shortwave antenna has been standing near Moosbrunn, south of Vienna, since 1983. The curtain antenna weighs 320 tons, produces up to 500 kilowatts, and has 2 towers, each 76 meters high. The system runs on rails so that it can be rotated 180 degrees. This is unique, at least in Europe, and makes it possible to broadcast to the furthest corners of the Earth. Nevertheless, owner ORS, a majority subsidiary of ORF, the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, would like to demolish the facility. The Moosbrunn site, overall, had been used since 1959, according to reporting from the German media outlet Haight Online. The process began last fall, and the unique antenna was successfully dismantled using a precise, targeted explosion, according to a press release from the ORS. Haight Online quoted Michael Kestelek, OE1MCU, president of the Austrian Experimental Radio Association, as saying that the decision by ORF was extremely regrettable, and pointed out that the service the shortwave signal still provided in places like Russia, where listening to foreign broadcast is otherwise very difficult. The rapid death of the industrial monument comes as a big surprise. Amateur radio operators are dismayed. Now, many relying on the internet makes them completely dependent on other service providers and political influencers, and online transmissions can be manipulated or blocked in target areas. In Russia, you can no longer listen to many stations via the internet, but you can via shortwave. The discussion about net neutrality also has an influence here. A petition to save the historic site received approximately 3,000 online signatures. According to Haight Online, Radio Österreich international programs were broadcast from the site until it was shut down in 2003. The shortwave transmitter was still used as a relay transmitter for international broadcasters through 2024.
World Radio Day, February 13th, was adopted in 2012 by the United Nations to acknowledge radio's role in people's lives everywhere. Although the focus is usually on broadcast radio services, amateur radio will be involved in some events around the world. This year's theme is Radio and Climate Change. One of the many international events happening involves the Shanghai Coast radio station, XSG, which maintains a global maritime distress and safety system, as well as Morse code telegraph services. The station is hosting a 2-day crossband event in which the radio station will communicate via CW with amateur radio operators, with each side transmitting on their authorized frequencies while monitoring the other party's frequencies. The event runs from 0000 UTC on February 12th to 0000 UTC the next day. Here is a list of amateur radio frequencies that XSG will be monitoring for ham transmissions. 3521.3 to 3526.3 kHz, 7021.3 to 7026.3 kHz, 10121.3 to 10126.3 kHz, 14021.3 to 14026.3 kHz and 21021.3 to 21026.3 kHz.
Paul Zerbinski, W9KHO, an employee of Ham Radio Outlet in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, received a certificate of honor from Ham Radio Outlet President Robert Ferrero, W6KR, for 60 years as an amateur radio operator. This is just the second time the award has been presented. Zerbinski's history in radio dates to 1964, when after being honorably discharged from the United States Air Force, he began working for High Gain Electronics in Lincoln, Nebraska. In 1967, Zerbinski began working at Amateur Electronic Supply in Milwaukee. In 2016, when AES aligned with HRO, Paul became the most senior sales associate, and he continues to work at the HRO Milwaukee store. ARRL Wisconsin Assistant Section Manager Tom Saja, KG9EE, extended his best wishes to Zerbinski. Congratulations, Paul, for your dedication to the amateur radio hobby and the amateur radio industry, wrote Saja.
The Radio Society of Great Britain exams team is pleased to announce the publication of a revised version of syllabus version 1.6. This update is known as version 1.6b. The revisions addresses feedback received from the community since the publication of version 1.6a. The companion document summarizes the changes made to the syllabus, which include moving some material from licensing in Section 1 to the more appropriate Section 7, which focuses on operating. There are no significant changes to the number and content of learning points. Version 1.6b will be in effect for exams held from April 1st, 2025.
The RSGB is looking for an assistant editor to join the team that produces its suite of Radcom publications. The successful candidate will be involved in everything from magazine production and sub-editing to writing articles and planning content. You will be a core part of the editorial team, working closely with and being managed by the Radcom managing editor. Reporting to the managing editor, you will commission articles and liaise with authors and their articles, sub-edit copies sent in by contributors and regular columnists, help to guide the content of Radcom Basics and Radcom Plus supplements, be a part of the team that puts together a weekly news script, answer queries from members of the Society on technical and amateur radio licensing matters, help develop the entire coordinated Radcom portfolio, including new media opportunities. You will be proficient in the use of the Microsoft Office suite of applications. Knowledge and experience of using Adobe InDesign and Adobe Photoshop are extremely desirable. You must be positive, enthusiastic about technology, and have an excellent command of English, a good eye for detail, and be able to work to exacting standards, often under pressure. A wide range of radio and electronic knowledge, including amateur radio, is desirable. This staff position is based at RSGB headquarters near Bedford, although an element of working from home could be discussed. The salary is negotiable depending upon relevant qualifications and experience. For an informal chat about the role, call the Radcom managing editor via radcom@rsgb.org.uk.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
It is time for this month's edition of the Volunteer Monitor Program report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the most recent edition activity report of the Volunteer Monitor Program. Commendations were issued to amateurs in Sequim, Moses Lake, Richland, Bot-Hell, Morton, and Soap Lake, Washington, Placerville, California, and Bend, Oregon, for exemplary operation as net control operators of the Columbia Basin net operating on 3.960 MHz. An amateur radio operator in Maryland received a commendation for exemplary AM operation, and for explaining proper AM operating procedures and transmitter settings to those participating in AM communications. Operators in Louisiana and Arizona received advisories for operation with expired licenses. A technician class operator in Florida received an advisory for FT8 operation on 40 meters. Technicians can only use CW on 40 meters. A technician class operator in Utah received an advisory concerning FT8 operation on 30 meters. Technicians have no operating privileges on 30 meters. An operator in Florida received an advisory for unattended robotic FT8 operation on 14.074 MHz. Under FCC Rule 97.221 Subpart B, an unattended station may be auto-controlled only while transmitting on RTTY or data on the subbands of 14.0950 to 14.0995 or 14.1005 to 14.112 MHz. Such stations may not call CQ, and can only respond to being polled. The totals for this report's monitoring were 1,562 hours on HF frequencies, and 2,215 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,777 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator, Riley Hollingsworth, K for ZDH for this report.
A de-expedition is going forward to the St. Peter and St. Paul rocks in the Atlantic Ocean after ham radio operators with the Araucaria DX group received permission to operate. The team said that the authority came from the Brazilian Navy, which operates a research station on the archipelago's major islet, Belmonte. The activation of the call sign PY0S will signal the first activation of its kind from the archipelago since the PT0S de-expedition in November of 2012. The Araucaria team plans to travel in October or November to the site, which is the 14th among Club Log's most wanted DX entities. According to a press release, the hams have a goal of going beyond calling QRZ. They said they want to increase worldwide awareness of this unique rock formation and the role played by the Brazilian Navy in scientific research and study of this extremely difficult and rare environment. The operation will not be on the rocks themselves. As stipulated by the Navy permit, the team will be on a boat anchored not far from the shore. 5 radios in a box will be used for operating CW, SSB, and FT8 on 160 through 6 meters. There will be 6 local operators: Adrian, KO8SCA, Fred, PY2XB, George, AA7JV, Mike, KN4EEI, Peter, PY5CC, and Tommy, HA7RY, along with a number of remote operators.
Amateur radio operators are known for their desire and unique ability to provide public service through communication. With more details on training the next generation of net controls, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, at League headquarters.
Whether activated for a severe weather event or a local event such as a marathon or bike ride, the utility value and versatility of the amateur radio service is enjoyed by communities around the country. One critical aspect of coordinating the communications is the role of net controller. These key volunteers bring order to chaos and flow to information. It is a specialized skill that requires development, practice, and training. On February 1st, Connecticut volunteers in the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES, held a training session. That session drew dozens of radio amateurs from around the state to a packed room inside the Newington Volunteer Fire Department. The half-day chorus, led by ARRL Connecticut Section Manager Douglas Harafanowicz, WA1SFH, was dynamic and participatory. George Papp, K1YBO, is a controller for the Western Connecticut Westcon Traffic Net, a part of the ARRL National Traffic System, NTS. It serves to flow messages in, out of, and throughout the state, and to serve as a training net. He was excited to see the high number of attendees. We always encourage new people to step up to volunteer for the net, and this helps provide a pathway for them, he said. In the training, Harafanowicz highlighted examples of needing a robust group of trained net control station NCS operators. When a black sky event takes place, it is rarely limited to an 8-hour shift. We will need trained NCS operators not only to provide for initial shift coverage, but also we will need relief NCS operators to cover following shifts, he said. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
If you'd like to get involved as a net control station, talk with your local ARRL emergency coordinator or district emergency coordinator to express your interest. You may also find National Traffic Systems Net resources in your area at nts2.arrl.org.
Faced with the upcoming sunset of methods used to calculate fees for repeaters, beacons, and some apparatus amateur licenses, the Australian Communications and Media Authority has finalized small changes it is making. These changes, based on a new methodology, will take effect after the 1st of April sunset of the previous method. The result is that repeaters, beacons, and non-assigned apparatus licenses will be assessed $52.62 annually. The changes do not affect those holding Australian-class licenses, which have no annual fees. The ACMA said in its February 5th announcement that it has not yet finalized its apparatus license tax reforms for radio navigation satellite service repeaters.
On January 27, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, or ISED, released the new Basic Qualification Question Bank for amateur radio. This new question bank will be used for all basic amateur radio certifications beginning July 15. Until then, the old Basic Question Bank will be used for all basic exams. Candidates, instructors, and authors of the amateur radio study guides may wish to study the new question bank, which is available for download from the ISED website. Since early 2023, Radio Amateurs of Canada has had a committee of 20 instructors and accredited examiners working to update and improve the quality of the 980 questions, the 984 correct answers, and 2,900 distractors in the question bank. This was the first major update to the question bank since 2013. Radio Amateurs of Canada's Examination Standards Committee worked closely with ISED officers on the final versions of the exams, which were agreed upon by the RAC and the ISED in late 2024. Radio Amateurs of Canada has prepared the following documents to help with the transition to the new question bank. A bilingual document which contains old questions next to the new questions and provides notes explaining the changes, and a separate English and French version of the document containing a list of the 201 new questions.
A SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launched SiriusXM's latest satellite recently. Built by Maxar Space Systems using its Maxar 1300 platform, SXM-9 is more than 27 feet tall and approximately 100 feet long with its solar arrays deployed. At launch, it weighed around 6,400 kilograms. The satellite features an S-band reflector antenna supplied by L3 Harris. The geostationary satellite will be a twin high-powered digital audio radio satellite built on Maxar's proven 1300 class platform at the company's manufacturing facilities in Palo Alto and San Jose, California, the two companies said in an announcement. In December, the company announced a renewed emphasis on in-car listening after previously focusing on streaming. SiriusXM said it reaches approximately 160 million equipped vehicles. Subscribers likely won't notice any difference while listening on the road, but the media provider stated the satellite strengthens its coverage across the contiguous United States, Puerto Rico, and Canada. Bridget Neville, SiriusXM's Senior Vice President and General Manager of Signal Distribution Engineering, said in a statement that the launch is expected to enhance the health of its satellite fleet for the foreseeable future. The company's fleet includes multiple active satellites as well as an in-orbit spare. SiriusXM plans to launch its SXM-10 satellite later this year, with SXM-11 and SXM-12 in development, though their launch timelines are yet to be determined.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Well, to be honest, I was surprised that no one emailed me to find out about my exploits with my vertical. You know, between the snow and the slush and the rain and everything else, I've been kind of limited on what I could do. However, since I know that you've all been wondering, the good news is that the 15-meter trap was in fact replaced, and the vertical is now performing very well. The trap was filled with water, but honestly the winding had broken off at the bottom due to corrosion. It's been up 11 years, and it was in use 6 years before that, and this is really the first time I've had any issues. So I'm pretty happy, and it's up and running. So no more whining from me. There's a lot of DX activity going on, so let's get started. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll get you fixed up. The worldwide amateur radio community was abuzz last week with news of a previously unannounced DXpedition to Mount Athos, which Wikipedia described as a mountain on the Athos Peninsula in northeastern Greece, directly on the Aegean Sea, and an important center of Eastern Orthodox monasticism, end quote. The first operation from this community was 50 years ago in 1975 with the same call sign, Sugar Victor 1 Golf Alpha / Alpha. Two of the operators from the 1975 DXpedition were invited back this year, SV1GA Aris and OH2BH Marty Lane. They were later joined by K08SCA Adrian, Y08WW Gaby, and OH2GEK Nico. The team arrived on January 25th, set up quickly, and got on the air. Their logs are available on Club Log, and all seemed well. However, SV1GA/A went off the air earlier this week without any explanation. This fueled intense speculation as well as baseless rumors. On Wednesday, January 29th, the team said that, quote, time flows differently in the holy community as even the morning prayers start at 4 a.m. We can all learn and benefit from the Mount Athos lifestyle. Most importantly, the SV1GA/A team is safe and in good spirits and excited to have brought on the air such a rare DX entity. The matter of amateur radio on Mount Athos is in the hands of different entities within the holy community, and all we can do at this point is serve as a source of knowledge and expertise. For us, the key entity is the authority that issued our invitation/permit to carry out the SV1GA operation. Our paperwork is as clear as water, but outside sources have put everything on hold for further review. Despite the optimism of this communication, the team has left Mount Athos the next day. At this time, there are more questions than answers. The Daily DX and the Weekly DX will share any updates that we receive, and I will certainly repeat those here, so stay tuned. The Araucaria DX Group is pleased to announce it has received permission from the Marinha do Brasil, which is the Brazilian Navy, for a DXpedition to the Archipelago de São Pedro e São Paulo, which is St. Peter and St. Paul Archipelago. The operation will take place in October and November 2025 timeframe. The actual dates will be announced later. The St. Peter and St. Paul rocks are located at 0 degrees 55.2 north and 29 degrees 20.9 west, about 60 miles north of the equator, approximately 600 miles from the city of Natal on the British mainland. St. Peter and St. Paul rocks, PY0S, is number 14 on Club Log's Most Wanted list, number 3 in Asia. PY0S was last activated in 2012. Since then, permission to land and operate from the rocks has not been granted. Our radio-in-a-box RIB capabilities enable us to make this activation possible without the operators being physically on the rocks, therefore meeting the key requirement of the Navy for a very small footprint operation with minimum human presence. According to the permit, 2 of us will be allowed to land each day for a limited time to refuel the generators and make any necessary repairs. We plan to deploy 5 RIBs for a total of 6 stations. Operators will be working from the boat anchored a short distance from the rock. We plan to be active on 160 through 6 meters on CW, sideband, and FT8. There will be 6 local operators: Adrian, KO8SCA, Fred, PY2XB, George, AA7JV, Mike, KN4EEI, and Peter, PY5CC. Tommy, HA7RY, as well as a number of remote operators will join in as well. The RIB equipment, which makes this operation possible, was developed with the support of the Northern California DX Foundation, or the NCDXF. The St. Peter and St. Paul archipelago is unique as the only place where the mid-Atlantic range, as 5 small rocky islets pierce the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. The largest of these is Belmonte, with a total area of 5,400 square meters, which is just over 1 acre. Not all of this area is dry. Large waves often wash over some parts of the islet. The Brazilian Navy maintains a permanent research station on Belmonte, which is manned year-round. Our upcoming operation is not only aimed at making this number 14 DXCC entity available to DXers, but also to increase worldwide awareness of this unique rock formation and the role of the Brazilian Navy in scientific research and study of this extremely difficult and rare environment. The RIB concept was developed for operations where human presence is severely restricted. RIBS, which again stands for Rig in a Box, contains 1 or 2 flex radio HF transceivers, as well as power supplies, control modules, and power amplifiers, all housed in a weather-tight case. Add power and antenna and a UHF control link, and they can be operated without human presence. We'll be making future announcements as we finalize the dates, call signs, and complete required formalities. I am really excited. That will be a new one for me, so I hope they get it going, and I'm sure they will, actually. Per Pat, F2DX, slightly edited for clarity, he published, quote, "After success of our 9 Lima 5 Alpha DXpedition in 2024, the F6 KOP Radio Club of Provence plans to go to Saint-Pierre and Miquelon for 10 days, sometimes this year, to operate as FP5KE. Although FP is sometimes active, there has never been such a big expedition as we're going to organize. There will be 16 operators with at least 7 active stations, 160 through 6, all modes, and probably 2-meter EME. Faithful to our principles, the human modes of CW, sideband, and RIDI will be favored without abandoning FT4 and FT8. Additional information such as dates and website will be communicated later. Nominations for the CQDX Hall of Fame and the CQ Contest Hall of Fame are due March 1st. These annual awards are presented during dinners held in conjunction with the Dayton Hamvention. So if you have someone you'd like to nominate for either the Contest Hall of Fame or the DX Hall of Fame, drop me a note and I'll make sure you know exactly how to get that done. The International DX Association, or INDEXA, has assumed responsibility for the CQDX Hall of Fame, and the Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation is now managing the CQ Contest Hall of Fame. Send CQDX Hall of Fame nominations to N200, Bob Schenk, and CQ Contest Hall of Fame nominations to K1AR, John Doerr, or as I mentioned, you can send them to me, thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll make sure they get forwarded. The Southwest Ohio DX Association, or SWDEXA, will host the DX dinner during Hamvention. It will be on Friday, May 16th at the Dayton Marriott at the University of Dayton. There will be a cash bar from 5:30 to 11, and the program will begin at 7 p.m. You can purchase dinner tickets on the swdexaevents.org website or drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Finally, reservations are open for the 31st Annual Contest Dinner on May 17th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. at the Hope Hotel. K1AR, John Doerr, will be the Master of Ceremonies, and KL9A, Chris Hurlbut, will be the keynote speaker. A new YouTube episode of the DX Mentor will drop this weekend with details on the upcoming TI-1 RRC DXpedition to Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. Each stop will involve some POTA activity, and you don't want to miss this. So now we can move on to contest updates. I know that the ARRL contest sheet is read elsewhere in the podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or to get entities or zones in the log that may otherwise be difficult to get. The first one to mention is the ARRL International DX Contest CW, which takes place the weekend of the 15th and 16th of February. There's a lot of activity in this one, and it's a great way to work DX. The exchange is RST plus state and province for Canadian and U.S. amateurs, or RST and power level for DX stations. It's a great contest with a lot of activity, and I hope you take advantage of it. Please let me know if you participate. The weekend of February 21st will feature the CQ 160-meter single sideband contest. The exchange will be a signal report in state or province for Canadian U.S. stations and a signal report and CQ zone for DX stations. This is a really fun contest, and I hope you give it a try. You know, I've kind of talked up 160 a lot because I thoroughly enjoy it. A few weeks ago, I offered you some details on my compact vertical antenna for 160 that only needs a 60-foot circle or even less. You can get on 160 very quickly with this. Just drop me a note via thedxmentor@gmail.com and I will send you along the details. That same weekend, we'll host the North American RIDI QSO Party. This is also a fun time that allows you to work states and counties in DX that you may need. If you choose to do that one, let me know because I'd like to track your progress. Now, you can send me an email if you need details on any of these, or you could follow me on Facebook, the DX Mentor. So please do that. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Welcome to the 25th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for granting us permission to use his website in the generation of these segments. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this, the next chapter of Ham Radio History. Freaks! The uneven, partly unpredictable nature of radio wave propagation continued to fascinate hams during and after the war. The solar cycle had peaked around 1917, just in time for hams to miss it because of the war shutdown. Now, with the next solar minimum little more than 2 years away, hams had just gone through the first winter season of primetime operating since the reopening, and had begun to notice some peculiarities and marked differences in signals from when they had last listened. In late December 1919, radio was blacked out again, but this time it was nature's doing, not a government edict. Strangely, the shorter wavelengths were dead despite the fact that 600-meter signals were still pounding in. No stations further than about 100 miles away could be heard. A QST editor later wondered whether there could have been any connection with the cosmic disturbances in progress at the time. The idea was confirmed early the following year. Hams observed that a particularly severe radio blackout had immediately followed an intense and widespread auroral display. Both were evidently caused by a solar flare on 21 March 1920 and had brought message handling to a complete halt. While stations inside the daylight range were unaffected, no one further away could be heard, and the air was unusually quiet. Conditions gradually returned to normal after a day or so. There were also other oddities, too. Aside from the blackouts, hams sometimes experienced greatly increased static during the winter, the season when quiet was usually the norm, along with other erratic behavior of the operating weather. The League collected opinions and theories about the causes of these anomalies, no matter how unlikely. One amateur claimed to have heard signals fade away during a lunar eclipse. He asked, was it a coincidence, or was it the same effect some claimed to have heard when the planets were on the same side of the sun? But the QST editor endorsed a theory being proposed by many scientists that the main cause for the disruptions was sunspots. It was perhaps the first reference to the phenomenon in QST. ARRL Traffic Manager J.O. Smith asked whether the phenomena of natural signal variations were not really fading at all, but actually enhancement, since signals that could not be heard in daytime became detectable at night. He was right, but he also repeated a mistaken observation that signals were stronger on nights following a cloudy day than after a sunny day, and then disproved it by noting that the increase did not occur evenly or proportionally for all the stations and in all directions. Selective enhancement seemed to have a directional or distance dependence, with fading occurring more quickly or slowly according to where the far station was located. He concluded that this must be due to ground effects as well as atmospheric ones, and noted the existence of pockets where, if you were in one, you could work far away stations easier than intermediate distance ones. For example, New England to the Midwest compared with New England to New York City. He called for observations from amateurs so that these things could be studied collaboratively. Charles A. Lowry of Toronto wrote a 2-page letter on fading phenomena, also commonly referred to as freaks or swings. He had spent a long time monitoring 600 meters during the summer and fall of 1918 at a British naval station on the southeastern coast of Nova Scotia, specified as somewhere around 43 north, 65 west, which is actually off the coast. He reported several cases of fading he heard on signals coming from naval vessels and stations from a variety of locations, including the Midwestern U.S., the Caribbean, and places to his north. The strange variations usually began around 5 p.m. and changed in nature through the night, ending around 8 in the morning. To accompany his monitoring, he logged the weather at several locations, and in doing so disproved any connection or correlation to weather conditions. He also observed stations fading out completely at his location while simultaneously fading in at another. Thoroughly fascinated, he puzzled. How, I ask you, do NAJ SIGs miss Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo, and yet come in strong and clear at a station 1,500 miles from him and in a straight line over their heads? Striving to answer that question, Hams would lead the world into the unanticipated, unexplored landscape of the shortwaves. The League proposed that amateurs should make use of the upcoming summer months to collect data on so-called fading phenomena in a systematic, scientific way. Still viewing it as a problem rather than an indicator of new abilities, they would seek an explanation for it, hoping to find a remedy. For example, groups would use several receivers located at equal distance but in different directions from the transmitter, and then could detect directional effects on signal strength. Division managers could arrange a regular schedule of transmissions and collect reception reports. In fact, the radio section of the Bureau of Standards had requested the ARRL's help in a similar study, and arrangements were being made to accommodate. The League's capability for organizing, collecting, and analyzing reports in such a test far outclassed the Bureau's. The request of the Bureau constitutes another governmental recognition of the value of our ARRL, and we are proud and happy to be of service. Let us do our level best for them, wrote Warner. QSS was proposed as the new Q-signal abbreviation for fading phenomena. A month later, featuring a glamorous woman wearing headphones on its cover, QST carried the announcement of an ambitious set of QSS tests. By the way, the August Strays column later noted, the editor refuses to answer inquiries as to why the June QST had the cover it did. Stations across the country would transmit an arbitrary QST according to a schedule to be published in July. Anyone interested in participating could receive these transmissions and keep track of fading phenomena over time, then report their observations. The results would be analyzed by a group at ARRL, and as Warner explained, it is hoped and expected that valuable and intensely interesting information will be forthcoming. Thus is what the radio game most needs right now: reliable information on the subject. Attempts to correct it can have no chance unless based on a knowledge of the problem, and this we hope to develop. Just as there was hope for a cure of strays, static, surely freaks could be done away with, too, through study, understanding, and ingenuity. A test plan came together that included a procedure to help standardize observations and reporting. Transmitting stations would send a complete alphabet 5 times at a speed of 18 words per minute. Receiving stations would then record the strength of the signals for each letter according to the well-known Eccles scale running from 0 to 9. Collaborating with the Bureau of Standards, the League developed a QSS test reporting form which members could replicate themselves. they were still so convinced that the phenomena had something to do with the weather that a section of the report form was devoted to recording the weather conditions in a standardized way. The huge analysis job would be divided up and handled by each of the 17 divisions in the league's operating department. Amateurs were instructed to send reports to their home division's fading committee, FC, or that of the division where the transmitter was located if different. Members responded with enthusiasm. The announcement generated the highest level of interest the editors of QST had ever seen for a cooperative operation. The tests would be done for the Bureau of Standards with participants chosen from among ARRL members because of their location. The ARRL also enlarged upon the idea and was arranging for similar tests in each division. Included in this material are quotes from the following. A Lesson, Editorial, QST, February 1920, page 17. Octothorpe, $, percentage sign, ampersand, star, asterisk, question mark, exclamation point, comma. Editorial, QST, May 1920, page 23. Eclipse Observations, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, June 1920, page 51. J. O. Smith, Variations on Strength of Amateur Station Signals, QST, April 1920, page 17. Observations of Fading, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, April 1920, page 47. Fighting Fading, Editorial, QST, May 1920, page 23. The ARRL, QSS Tests, June 1920, page 5. W. E. Eccles, On Measurement of Signal Strength, Proceedings of the IRE, June 1919, pages 267 to 268. With thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for granting us permission to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Here's a follow-up to a story we talked about last week. The same day it passed through the Senate Commerce Committee, the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act has been reintroduced into the U.S. House of Representatives by Representative Gus Bilirakis of Florida and House Energy and Commerce Committee Ranking Member Frank Pallone of New Jersey. The bill seeks to ensure that AM radio remains standard in all newly manufactured vehicles, reinforcing its role as a critical source of emergency information and local news. The AM Act saw strong support in the last congressional session, where the House Energy and Commerce Committee advanced the bill with a 45-2 vote. It also received endorsements from over 250 House members and more than 125 organizations, advocating for AM radio's continued presence in cars. The legislation follows its recent passage through the Senate Commerce Committee, where it received bipartisan backing. Introduced in the Senate by Commerce Committee Chairman Ted Cruz of Texas and Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, the bill has already gained 47 Senate co-sponsors. In a statement, Representative Bilirakis said, in order to maximize public safety and ensure continued access to every available option, it is critical to have a robust and widely accessible communication infrastructure in place to alert Americans during emergency situations, natural disasters. Radio broadcast still has one of the highest reaches of any medium, and with a majority of listening taking place outside of the home, we must ensure that this useful tool remains a readily available option for all Americans who own vehicles. I'm proud to work with Ranking Member Pallone on this initiative and look forward to moving it through Congress, he added. National Association of Broadcasters President and CEO Curtis Legayet commented, AM radio is a proven lifeline during emergencies and a trusted source of news, sports, and community programming for millions of listeners. The NAB applauds Representatives Bilirakis and Pallone for their continued leadership in ensuring Americans continue to have AM radio in every vehicle. We urge swift House passage of this bipartisan legislation to protect this vital local service.
The magnetic North Pole has officially shifted position, continuing its movement away from Canada and towards Siberia. The event has prompted a recalibration of navigation systems used in ships, airplanes, and other technologies. This point on Earth, where the magnetic field points vertically downwards, is constantly changing due to the dynamic movement of iron and nickel within our planet's core. Experts around the world collaborate every 5 years to update the World Magnetic Model, a crucial tool that maps the shifting magnetic landscape. Historically, the magnetic North Pole has drifted slowly around Canada since the 1500s, but recent decades have seen an unprecedented acceleration towards Siberia, followed by a sudden deceleration in the past 5 years. This unusual behavior is attributed to the influence of two large magnetic lobes beneath Canada and Siberia. The latest World Magnetic Model, released in 2025, provides a more precise map of magnetic north, including a higher resolution version with 10 times greater detail than previous models. This improved accuracy is vital for navigation. For instance, a journey from South Africa to the UK using the old World Magnetic Model could result in a 150-kilometer deviation. While mapping and logistics companies, governments, and agencies will actively incorporate these updates, consumers won't need to manually adjust their phones or satellite navigation, as the changes will be implemented automatically. Since its discovery in 1831, tracking the magnetic North Pole has become increasingly important for understanding our planet's dynamic magnetic field.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. As you might recall, recently I stumbled on an excellent list of 52 weekly challenges put together by Fabian, Delta Juliet 5 Charlie Whiskey and Friends. You can find it at hamchallenge.org. As I've previously mentioned, it contains activities right across the amateur spectrum, from designing a QSL card to making a contact on 80 meters or 160 meters, with everything in between. It's an excellent tool to set a weekly goal to achieve, and I recommend that you have a go. It's not the only interesting tool around. Amal, Victor Uniform 3, Foxtrot Tango Hotel, and Steph Piper, whom you might know as Maker Queen AU, have put together an amateur radio skill tree. It's a collection of hexagonal tiles, each with a skill, displayed together in an attempt to track what you know and could know about amateur radio. The idea is that you print it out and colour in each tile as you complete it. You'll find things like explore D-Star, build a CW key, teach a friend about amateur radio, and plenty more. Can you get 4 activities in a row, and which skills could do with more effort? There are 68 tiles ready for your colouring pencil. Bingo! The Radio Amateur Training, Planning and Activities Committee, better known as the Rat Pack, put together an amateur radio challenge checklist for 2025 and published it on mastodon.radio. It's a list of bands, modes, activities, builds and clubs that help you track what you've been up to throughout the year. While we're here, I should mention that the Rat Pack, in their words, comprises amateur radio operators of a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, and hosts 2 weekly Zoom meetings so anyone can participate in the talks published on the ratpack.us website. If you're unable to attend, you'll find the presentation on YouTube. Over the years I've been part of this amazing hobby, I've been telling anyone who will listen that there is plenty to do and see in our community, 1,000 hobbies in one. The tools I've mentioned represent around 150 activities and pursuits, but hidden behind each one is plenty to explore. For example, Hand Challenge asks you to spend week 21 creating a GNU radio flow graph. That topic alone could fill a decade worth of exploration, if you were so inclined. Similarly, one of the skill tree tiles is Study RF Propagation, something which you might realize is easier said than done. The Rat Pack checklist has a tick box for Work 100 Countries, not something you're likely to achieve in an afternoon. My point is, you can do as much or as little of this as you like, to whatever degree floats your boat. As you might know, I'm deep in the weeds with GNU Radio, and I expect to stay there for plenty of time to come. But you are under no obligation to follow me down the rabbit hole. In other words, it interests me, but it might not do the same for you. One final comment. None of these activities require you to upgrade your license. Well, other than the skill tree tile, upgrade your radio license. You can do most, if not all, of the activities I've shared with any amateur license, and plenty of it can be done without a license at all. So, what are you waiting for? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
With the slow demise of physical media the past few years, companies are gradually closing shop on producing everything from the physical media itself to their players and recorders. For Sony, this seems to have now escalated to where it'll be shuttering its optical media storage operations completely after more than 18 years of producing Blu-ray discs. This also includes mini-disc media and mini-DV cassettes. We previously reported on Sony ending the production of recordable Blu-ray media for consumers, which now seems to have expanded to Sony's remaining storage media. It also raises the likelihood that Sony's next game console, like the PlayStation 6, will not feature any optical drive at all. While mini-DV likely was the only interesting to those of us still lugging one of those mini-DV camcorders around, the loss of mini-disc production may be felt quite strongly in the indie music scene, where mini-disc is experiencing somewhat of a revival alongside cassette tapes and vinyl records. Although it would appear that physical media is now effectively dead in favor of streaming services, it might be too soon to mark its demise.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. MESAT-1, having been successfully launched, was issued their Oscar number and is now known as MESAT-1 Oscar 122 or MO 122. The satellite was the first for the University of Maine. The VU inverting transponder has an uplink on 145.910 through 145.940 MHz lower sideband, and a downlink on 435.810 through 435.840 MHz upper sideband. Telemetry using Fox Telem can be found on 435.800 MHz, 1200 BPSK. URE-SAT-1, or SO-120, finally deployed its antennas after a year and a half. Unfortunately, the VHF antenna is not fully deployed. It can be seen in SSTV images crossing the lens. Thus, the satellite requires a strong uplink signal to break the squelch. Did you ever wonder why the downlink from most of the satellites is on UHF and not VHF? Man-made noise. VHF is widely used around the world and causes interference with the weak signals from the satellites. UHF does not suffer from that issue. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for the ARRL Solar Weather and Propagation Report. SpaceWeather.com reports that Sunspot 3981 has produced more than 20 M-class solar flares, including 2 that almost reached Category X. The activity is likely to continue. The sunspot retains a Delta-class magnetic field that harbors energy for frequent explosions. The current solar forecast calls for there to be no G1 or greater geomagnetic storms. A potential glancing blow is possible on February 8th. Solar radiation, as observed by NOAAGO's 18 satellite over the past 24 hours, was below the S-scale storm level thresholds. The S-scale is used to indicate the severity of energetic particles emitted from the Sun. The scale ranges from S1, minor, to S5, extreme. There is a chance for S1 or greater solar radiation storms due to the complex cluster of sunspot groups in the northwest quadrant of the Sun. Radio blackouts are expected through February 8th, with a chance for R3, strong events due to several magnetically complex sunspot groups. There is a chance for S1, minor, or greater solar radiation storms through February 9th as the complex cluster of sunspot regions in the north continues to rotate closer to the western limb. The geomagnetic field activity is expected to maintain unsettled to active levels on February 10th through the 19th. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the League's Technical Information Service to read what the numbers mean, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lowetzelschwab, K9LA. A propagation bulletin archive is available. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOACAP online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, February 8th and 9th, the CQWW RIDI WPX contest, that's digital. February 8th, the Asia Pacific Spring Sprint, that's CW. February 8th and 9th, the KCJ Top Band contest, CW there. February 8th and 9th as well, the Dutch PACC contest, CW and phone. The SKCC Weekend Sprintathon, CW. The OMIS QSO Party, that's phone. And on February 8th, the WAB.1.8 megahertz phone, that is phone as well. And finally, on February 8th, the RSGP 1.8 megahertz contest, that is CW. And don't forget to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming Section State and Division Conventions, February 7th through the 9th, the Orlando Hamcation, as we talked about earlier, hosting the ARRL Southeastern Division Convention. That's in Orlando, Florida. February 8th as well, the Hendricks County Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Indiana Section Convention. That's in Danville, Indiana. And on February 14th through 15th, the Yuma Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Southwestern Division Convention. That's in Yuma, Arizona.
ARRL is helping members get the most out of amateur radio through On the Air Live, a monthly series of training sessions. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
The live events are hosted by ARRL Education Specialist Wayne Green, KB4DSF, and offer a deep dive into topics hams will find useful. We had a great crowd at January's On the Air Live. We showed folks how to get started in slow scan television, said Green. The next OTA Live is February 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and will be on the topic of how to use your handheld radio. Registration in advance is required, but it's free for all members. And if you can't make it to the live event, a recording will be available in the ARRL Learning Center. On the Air Live is a perfect intersection of education and inspiration. We want participants to come away empowered and inspired to make the most of their involvement in ham radio, said ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. The monthly events tie in with the content from the On the Air magazine, which will match the current subject matter of OTA Live. All ARRL members have digital access to On the Air and 3 other high-quality magazines at www.arrl.org/magazines. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
We look forward to having members join us for On the Air Live. The more the merrier, and we hope to help get hams more involved in the hobby, said Green. Find On the Air Live and replays in the ARRL Learning Center at learn.arrl.org.
FRAM2 is a pioneering private astronaut mission, the first to fly astronauts over the North and South Poles. FRAM2 will give the 4 onboard astronauts unprecedented first views of the polar regions from space. While astronauts on the ISS can see a large portion of the Earth, it is not possible to see these upper regions of Earth from the ISS. FRAM2 is planned to be launched no later than March 1, 2025, and is planning a 3-day mission with an optional 2-day extension. The amateur radio experimental payload on FRAM2, called Fram to Ham, is also pioneering in nature. It represents the first use of human spaceflight amateur radio in polar orbit and the first amateur radio transmissions from a SpaceX Dragon capsule. Fram to Ham operations are being performed by private astronaut Rabea Roge amateur radio call signs LB9NJ from Norway and KB3AID from the United States. Fram to Ham will transmit slow-scan television picture images from space to radio receivers on the ground as part of a high school and university student competition. These SSTV images can also be received by radio enthusiasts worldwide and posted to the ARIS SSTV gallery, but with a twist. Images posted will not be shown until after the FRAM2 mission. These operations support the Youth SSTV competition, where they are to acquire several SSTV puzzle pieces, assemble the puzzle, determine the polar location, and answer questions related to that location. Operations frequency will be 437.550 MHz. Using the SSTV plan for Fram to Ham, ground users can practice the more challenging 70 cm Doppler correction. SSTV mode will be PD120. The longer image capture for this simulation will allow ground users to hone their signal polarization switching skills, both manually and electronically, as well as precise antenna pointing. Operations duration will be from February 13th, which is World Radio Day, to February 17th, 2025. This long duration over a weekend will allow users multiple passes to practice, learn lessons, make corrections, and try again. For more information on the FRAM2 mission and for youth organizations interested in participating in the Fram to Ham SSTV competition, visit framtoham.com. ARIS also has a FRAM2 tab on its website, www.ariss.org.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
The Hurricane Watch Net, or HWN, founded on Labor Day weekend of 1965, is celebrating its 60th anniversary. With more details, not only on the HWN anniversary, but with news on their net control recruitment program, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this special report.
The Hurricane WatchNet HWN, founded on Labor Day weekend 1965, is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. Net manager Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, reports that HWN is preparing for what could be yet again an above-average hurricane season, and that the net needs more amateur radio operators to help. We are starting early in this year's preparations and looking to add more net control stations to our roster, said Graves. We're looking for dedicated new members willing to train to become net control operators, NCOs. While being bilingual is not a requirement, being fluent in Spanish and English or French Creole and English is a plus. While HWN membership is required to serve as a net control station, radio amateurs do not need to be net members to participate as HWN reporting stations that provide observed or measured weather reports or relay assistance as required by the HWN net control. The net generally activates whenever a storm system has achieved a hurricane status and was in 300 miles of a populated landmass, but this can vary due to the forward speed and intensity of the storm or the request of the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center. Once activated, the Hurricane WatchNet operates 24/7 on 14.325 megahertz during the day and 7.268 megahertz at night until a storm is no longer a threat to life and property. Hurricanes can and do make landfall at night, added Graves. The HWN cannot assign net controllers responsibilities on a specific timetable, but must be prepared to work as a cohesive unit, passing control as the situation dictates and keeping the net available for as much time as it takes to get the job done. At this time, there's a real need for stations located in the middle to western sections of the U.S., Canada, Central America, and throughout the Caribbean. Those who are fully bilingual, fluent in Spanish and English or French Creole and English, and stations who can help with overnight operations, midnight to 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Not all applicants are accepted. One common reason is that when an applicant is from an area which is overcrowded with members, That's a good problem to have, said Graves. This does not mean, however, that an applicant may not be accepted in the future. The HWN will keep applications on file for future reference. More information on the net, including weather data on the tropics and more, please visit the HWN website, www.hwn.org. To read more about the HWN, its history and mission, visit the Hurricane WatchNet, Who We Are. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
If you're interested in training to become a net control operator for the Hurricane WatchNet, please visit the Net Control information page on the Internet.
A ham radio operator is one of 4 astronauts who will be aboard the first space flight to orbit the Earth via the North and South Poles. The mission aboard the Fram-2 is scheduled to last anywhere from 3 to 5 days after its scheduled launch, sometime after March 1st, 2025. The spacecraft's name is a tribute to the Fram, a Norwegian-built ship used on expeditions to both poles during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The space mission's pilot, Reba Gogga of Germany, is that nation's first female astronaut. She holds the amateur radio call signs LB9NJ and KD3AID. She'll be transmitting SSTV images using the amateur radio equipment on board. Although the images are to be sent as part of a high school and university competition for students, the images also may be received by any amateur operator capable of receiving SSTV transmissions. After the mission is complete, the images will also be available for viewing on the SSTV gallery of amateur radio on the International Space Station. This is also an ambitious scientific research mission, flying an estimated 425 to 450 kilometers above both poles. The flight is expected to present unprecedented views of both polar regions. The crew will conduct a variety of scientific experiments on board. Reba's crewmates on the Dragon spacecraft will be Commander Chung Wang of Malta, Vehicle Commander Janike Mikkelsen of Norway, and Mission Specialist Eric Phillips of Australia. Additional details about the mission and each crew member can be found on the web at f2.com.
Over a year and a half after launch, SO-120, or Eurosat-1, has finally deployed its antennas. Jan PE0SAT discovered the signal of SO-120 on January 28th, and telemetry confirmed that the satellite was showing that the antennas were deployed. SO-120 was launched on June 12, 2023. On January 31st, AMSAT EA managed to activate the repeater of SO-120, but in its secondary uplink frequency of 145.925 MHz. No subtone required. Downlink working well on 436.888 MHz. The VHF antenna seems not fully deployed, as it can be seen in the SSTV images received are showing just a yellow color, which is the VHF antenna over the camera lens. SSTV images are transmitted in Robot 36. As the VHF antenna is not fully deployed, the FM repeater requires a strong uplink signal to break the squelch. The satellite also can play chess. AMSAT EA will send chess moves suggested via @AMSAT Spain on X. Help is requested by receiving the chess telemetry.
First session of the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology reached 9 New York City area educators, but the ripple effects will reach thousands of students. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more in this report.
The session was held at the Staten Island Technical High School, home of a thriving and active amateur radio club. It was led in part by Everton Enriquez, KD2ZZT, an educator at the school and a TI graduate. In August of 2024, 49 of Enriquez's students earned their licenses. All 9 teachers came away with their amateur radio licenses if they didn't have one already, and the training, knowledge, and excitement to integrate amateur radio into their science, technology, engineering, and mathematics lessons. ARR Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA, says the results seen in hundreds of classrooms across the country speak for themselves. Amateur radio is a great platform upon which students can learn and experiment with STEM areas of instruction, said Goodgame. It allows students to participate in hands-on activities that give meaningful connections to lessons that would normally be abstract in the classroom. The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is funded entirely by donations to the ARRL Education and Technology Fund. No member dues go towards the program. The success that teachers across America are seeing is the result of hundreds of donors trusting ARRL to invest in the future of the hobby through educating and inspiring the next generation of hams. The program is free to educators. Many of these success stories are highlighted in the Radio Waves publication. Radio Waves aims to showcase how educators and licensed class instructors are getting their students and local communities involved in ham radio. Editions may be read online, or members can sign up for a free email delivery. We're seeing the results of the work we put into this program. Young people are getting inspired, licensed, and active in amateur radio, said Good Game. The time we commit to this will pay dividends to the hobby for generations to come. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Other sessions are planned for Texas and the Southeast during 2025. Interested educators are encouraged to apply. Learn more at www.arrl.org/TI.
Las Vegas, Nevada, American Legion Paradise Post 149, along with members of the 40 and 8 Voiture 306, will operate special event station NV7AL, February 19th through the 24th, 2025. The event celebrates the 76th anniversary of the United States and the state of Nevada receiving a 40 and 8 Mercy Train boxcar in 1949. The Mercy Train boxcar serves as a memorial to the Allies' participation in World War II. The car was called a 40 and 8 because the French military rated it to carry 40 men or 8 horses. There is a 40 and 8 Mercy Train boxcar located in Boulder City, Nevada. To learn more, visit Mercy Train. The 40 and 8, a charitable honor society of American wartime veterans, was formed in 1920 by American Legionnaires. NV7AL will be operating at various times each day, primarily on 7.074, 7.250, and 14.074 MHz. A QSL card will be available.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Time for a few short amateur radio stories this week, and first up is President George Washington's 293rd birthday, which will be celebrated by the Mount Vernon Amateur Radio Club, K4US, Alexandria, Virginia, on February 15, from 1500 UTC to 2000 UTC, and on February 16th from 1500 UTC until 1600 UTC. Club members will be operating from the Mount Vernon Greenhouse on the original grounds of the former plantation of George Washington and his wife Martha. Frequencies include 7.042, 7.242, 14.042, and 14.242 megahertz. QSL cards and additional information are available by contacting the Mount Vernon Amateur Radio Club, Box 7234, Alexandria, Virginia, 22307. The Mount Vernon Amateur Radio Club is an ARRL-affiliated club. Next up is changes occurring in the ARRL Utah section. Brett Pruitt, K7DBD, has been named as the new section manager of the ARRL Utah section. He has previously served as the section emergency coordinator and has been active in the leadership of his local amateur radio emergency service group. Pruitt has been instrumental in expanding the use of AREDN networks within Utah. Pruitt was appointed to the role effective February 1 of 2025. The change comes as current section manager Pat Milan, N7PAT, reassigned from the role for health reasons. Milan has served in that role since 2021. And lastly, the Shanghai Coast radio station, XSG, will host a global amateur radio special event on February 12 and 13. The station will celebrate its 120th anniversary and World Radio Day from 0000 UTC on February 12 to 2400 UTC on February 13. All contacts with SXG will be crossband contacts in Morse code, and XSG will operate on its authorized frequencies outside of the amateur radio band. Amateur radio operators making contact will operate within their own allocated amateur frequencies. XSG transmission frequencies are 4105, 6780, 8502, and 12871.5 kilohertz. XSG will receive frequencies on 3521.3 through 3526.3, 7021.3 through 7026.3, 10121.3 through 10126.3, 14021.3 through 14026.3, and 2120.3 through 21026.3. For more information, email hadt@shhadt.com.
An ambitious project in Canada hopes to develop a mesh network to link repeaters and accommodate several digital modes, hoping to combine the best features of such digital networks as Ham1, AREDN, and New Packet Radio. Developers in Canada are starting development of a mesh network that'll operate on the 70-centimeter band. Writing in the newsletter Zero Retries, Martin Alcock, VE6VH, said the project is being designed to link repeaters using RF, and it'll include digital voice modes, data transfers, messaging, and a data networking layer. The project is called IP400, short for Intelligent Protocol 400. It has the support of the Alberta Digital Radio Communications Society, and it's looking for contributors familiar with the C and C++ languages. Free open source code is being used in the development. IP400 is intended to operate on amateur frequencies between 420 and 450 megahertz. Martin said that unlike conventional analog links, a digital mesh platform will be capable of carrying compressed digital video as well as compressed audio and telemetry. He writes, the first step is to get a simple chat and beaconing application running to experiment with the technology. From there, we can layer on other features and frame types and then consider moving into the repeater world.
The 29.8-meter parabolic antenna at the Australian Overseas Telecommunications Commission station has come back to life again after nearly 40 years spent in decommissioning limbo. This parabolic dish antenna shares an illustrious history, together with the older 12.8-meter Casshorn antenna, in that, together, they assisted with many NASA missions over the decades. These not only include the Apollo 11 moon landing with the small antenna, but joined by the larger parabolic dish in 1969, the station performed tracking duty for NASA's ESA and many other missions. Yet in 1987, the station was decommissioned, with scrapping mostly averted due to the site being designated a heritage site with a local VK6 museum. In 2022, the 20.98-meter parabolic dish antenna was purchased by ThothX Australia, who together with the rest of ThothX's worldwide presence will be integrating the latest addition into a satellite tracking system that seems to have the interest of various military clients. ThothX's mission statement reads, "We aim at contributing to space safety and sustainability while meeting the needs of industry, academia, and government departments and agencies." Putting this decommissioned dish back into service wasn't simply a matter of flipping a few switches. Having sat mostly neglected for decades, it requires extensive refurbishing. But the most recent milestone demonstrates that the dish is capable of locking onto satellites. This opens the way for a top-to-bottom refurbishment, the installation of new equipment, and also a lick of paint on the dish itself, a process that will take many years, but beats watching such a historic landmark rust away by many light years. This antenna is a veteran of many notable NASA missions, including the Apollo 11 moon landing. Although it is not yet ready for prime time again, ABC News Australia reported in December 2024 that the dish had received its first signal in 40 years, sent as a test from a geostationary object.
For as long as there has been an understanding of electricity and radio waves, people have been experimenting with these technologies and advancing the state of the art. As a result, the world has moved from wired telegraphy to the tube radios to telephones, forward a century to GPS and high-speed digital communication devices that fit right in your pocket. Advances made by amateur radio experimenters have propelled the work of NASA, satellites, television, the Internet, and every communications company in existence today. People fiddling with radios have pushed forward technological advances around the world time and time again. Yet the people making these efforts, doing these feats, aren't always the best at documenting and preserving their work for the future. That's where Internet Archive comes in. Welcome to the Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications, or DLARC. The DLARC is a project of the Internet Archive, and its job is to find and preserve this rich history of radio and communications. DLARC collects resources related to amateur radio, satellite communications, television, shortwave radio, pirate radio, experimental communications, and related communications. In the 2 years since the project launched, DLARC has preserved thousands of magazines and journals, manuals, product catalogs, radio programs, and conference proceedings. These materials were scattered worldwide, often inaccessible and in obsolete formats. DLARC have digitized material that was on paper, cassette tape, reel-to-reel tape, CD-ROMs, DVDs, digitized video from 16mm film, VHS, U-matic, Betacam, and even more obscure video formats. They've built a collection of more than 140,000 items and made them available to the world. Researchers, academics, and hobbyists use the library to learn from the rich history of this 100-year-old hobby.
According to the 425DX Bulletin, Mustafa Azim Ezer, TA8DX, was 44 years old, and, with his wife, he was eagerly awaiting the birth of a daughter in just a few days when a catastrophic earthquake shook Turkey on February 6, 2023. They had even picked out the baby's name, Pera. An avid radio operator, mountaineering enthusiast, and search and rescue volunteer, Mustafa did not survive the 7.8 magnitude quake, which shook southern Turkey, northern Syria, and neighboring regions. His fellow amateurs are using the special event call sign TC8DX through February 17th to honor the memory of one of their own, a businessman and outdoorsman who gave back so generously to his community. His fellow hams are remembering him as the founder of an amateur radio association in Kahramanmaraş, an active supporter of many activities on HF and the VHF-UHF bands. Mustafa's final gesture of support to his community came in 2023, shortly before his death. He was among those activating special event station TC100TC to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of Turkey. 2 years later, his fellow hams now mark a more somber anniversary and remember their friend.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at TWIAR.net.
The Charleston Amateur Radio Club, KB3CAN, has an outlook that is anything but retiring. With only a small membership and a Maryland retirement community, the club recently completed Winter Field Day with 95 digital and SSB contacts in the log. Last summer, members were active in ARRL Field Day and the Maryland QSO Party. The club has something else to celebrate: the second year since its rebirth on the grounds of the Charleston Senior Living, a nonprofit retirement community in suburban Catonsville that provides continuing care ranging from independent living to skilled nursing. Club president Gary Rogers, KO3F, said that although the community has a long history of having an amateur radio club, the original club had to be dismantled more than a decade ago to accommodate building renovations. When Gary moved there in 2022 and discovered that his apartment's construction made it difficult to get on the air easily, he met with 2 members of the original club to start things up again. Gary went on to say in an email that the administration wasn't just on board but became part of the rebirth. He said the administration not only approved but assigned their maintenance staff to run the coax through the conduit to the roof and install the antennas, with me supervising. Installations were completed by November of 2023. Everything from the grounding system to ensuring the roof warranty was not compromised by the presence of antennas. There are 10 club members ranging from their 70s to their 90s. Gary said the club recently developed the capability to do WenLink, a global email system that uses radio frequencies instead of the internet. The club's next step is to explore how members can get on the air remotely from their individual apartments.
The Young Ladies Radio League, or YLRL, K4LMB, will host the 2025 SSB CW Digital YLOM contest from 0000 UTC February 13 until 2359 UTC on February 14. All licensed amateur radio operators throughout the world are invited to participate. All bands except 60, 30, 17, and 12 meters may be used. Net and repeater contacts do not count. Participants may work up to 36 of the 48 hours. The contact procedure is simple. OM male hams will call CQYL, and YLs, the female hams, will call CQOM. For more information, complete rules and awards, visit the contest page on the Young Ladies Radio League webpage.
You have until February 28th to nominate your favorite ham radio open source software project for the 6th Annual Amateur Radio Software Award. This international honor promotes free innovative software that enhances the ham radio experience. Past winners include David Rowe, VK5 DGR for Codec 2, Anthony Good, K3NG for Arduino, CW Keir, and Jordan Scherer, KN4 CRD for JS8 Call. Find award rules and the official nomination form at arsaward.com.
Mark Hammond, N8MH AMSAT Director, presented a commissioning update at the October 2024 AMSAT Symposium. His presentation spoke about the launch of the UMain MESAT-1 and provided operational details. MESAT-1 is now designated MESAT-1 Oscar 122, or MO-122. He explained Maine's first small satellite, a 3U CubeSat, was successfully launched on July 4, 2024 from Space Launch Complex 2 at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. It was NASA's educational launch of NEO satellites, ELANA Mission 43, and included 8 CubeSats flying on Firefly Aerospace's Alpha rocket. Hammond continued, MO-122 was designed and built at the University of Maine to use low-cost and low-power CMOS cameras to analyze water turbidity, identify urban heat islands, and predict harmful algal blooms from low Earth orbit. An AMSAT LTM-1 module provides command and control telemetry and a VU linear transponder. MESAT-1 has a multispectral 4 bands in the 550 to 1100 nanometer range, remote sensing instrument based on low-cost computer-grade cameras, a custom electrical power supply, an onboard computer based on the Raspberry Pi complete module, a custom low-cost deployable spacecraft antenna system, and a ground station with automated tracking. Current MO-122 reception reports indicate the AMSAT/UMain project is performing well on orbit. Here's the information needed for monitoring or using MO-122. What you need is VU inverting linear transponder, 30 kilohertz wide, a transponder uplink at 145.910 to 145.940 megahertz LSB. Transporter downlink is 435.810 to 435.840 megahertz upper sideband. Telemetry downlink is 435.800 megahertz, 1200 BPSK, and the total power out is just 1 watt. More details about the project are available via mainsat.org and UMain WISE-Net Lab. A YouTube video by M0YKS demonstrates the amateur radio capabilities. Follow NASA's Small Satellite blog for other launch updates.
According to the South African Radio League, the de-expedition to Bouvet Island next year is ready to go forward. Team 3Y0K plans to leave Cape Town, South Africa on February 1, 2026 for 36 days on the remote sub-Antarctic island, the 10th most wanted DXCC entity on the club log list. The team announced that it has signed a contract with Ice Tugs, an Iceland-based company that will transport them to the island by boat. Contracts have also been signed with Ultimate Aviation of Cape Town to provide the team with a helicopter, 2 pilots, and a mechanic. Costing an estimated $1.6 million in U.S. currency, the de-expedition will have a team of between 18 and 24 operators. Its financial support includes donations, as well as grants from the Northern California DX Foundation. The team said on its website that it considered the signing of the contracts with both companies to be a major milestone for the de-expedition.
Coming up on our 26th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And our final story this week begins with the question: have you ever heard of a satellite called Parkeye? If you haven't, don't feel bad. It was, after all, a top-secret project only revealed in July 2023. Ivan Amato not only heard about it, but also wrote a fascinating peek into the cloak and dagger world of Cold War spy satellites for this month's IEEE Spectrum newsletter. According to Ivan, the satellite helped the United States keep track of Russian submarines and was arguably the most capable orbiting spy platform ever, or at least that we get to hear about. Given that it was built in the 1970s, it was amazing that the satellite wasn't very large. The craft itself seemed small compared to its solar panels. Even today, the satellite remains a bit of a mystery. While the NRO, the U.S. Spy Satellite Agency, did acknowledge its existence in 2023, there is very little official information about it, although apparently other curious people have unearthed data on Parkeye over the years. According to the NRO, the satellites have not been in use since 2008. The Parkeye, named after the Romans' 3 Fates, worked in groups of 3 and launched in a dispenser that carried the trio of spaceships. They could listen to radio emissions from ships and use very accurate clocks to pinpoint their location based on the slight differences in the time each satellite heard the signal. One of these systems' unique features was that thanks to a mini-computer, ship positions could be in users' hands in minutes. That doesn't sound so impressive today, but it was an amazing achievement for that time. The article goes into more detail about how the individual satellites used a gravity boom for orientation and a lot of details about the designers. Of course, some of what Parkeye could do is still secret for now, so there may be more to this story later. Spy satellites can't always hide from backyard telescopes, and spy satellites always have impressive technology and, presumably, big budgets.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeaters around the country and around the world on great repeater systems like WA3PBD repeater system on Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. on 146.730 and 223.940, covering all of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and beyond. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.